Hi. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks to Foster White for having this opportunity to show this body of work. Like Donnell said, I've shown with the gallery for several years now. I think is this my second solo show? Yeah. And the space is fabulous, as you guys all know. So I'm always very pleased when I walk in and see the work, because my studio is probably about 600 square feet, which is really little compared to this. I live in Chicago. And kind of the catalyst for this body of work started because I was super busy last fall. And in February, I had a show in Chicago at the Surgical Science Museum. And it took a lot of effort to put that show together. And I was exhausted by spring. And I thought, I want to do a body of work that's quiet and calm and just kind of reflective. And normally my work just has a ton of energy and really more saturated colors, and it's very kind of intense, but quiet too. But I really purposely set out to create quiet work, which I'm an intuitive painter. I start my canvases on the floor, and I never know what I'm going to paint, and I never have any idea ahead of time, let alone starting out with kind of a concept. So for me, this was unusual. And I kept thinking, how do I get there? How do I get there? So because most of the work, as you can tell, is influenced by the organic shapes that you see in nature. If any of you are hikers or like to be outside in, near water in the woods. I grew up in Western Michigan and like along the dunes, and spent a lot of time outdoors. So when I think of my paintings, oftentimes, even though I have no idea what they're going to be at the end, when I step back and look at them, I see landscape, or I see, I can't not look at them and see certain things that come to me, but they only are there once the painting's complete. So it's just a process that ends at that stage. So I thought, how am I going to, create quiet? So I thought one of the first things I thought is I'll select a color palette for most of my paintings. You're nodding. You must be an artist. Yeah.
It's all the same,
Exactly.
I'm nodding because I'm a very intuitive person too. So it's like, yeah, I haven't been in color palette yet. I don't know what to do.
No, I mean, it is. You are who you are, and you're going to make music or art, from your personality and your sensibility. But you have to figure out, the tools, and then learn how to use those tools to get where you want to be. So this was a little different for me because I wanted to do quiet. So I thought the color palette would help change, and it did. And I start my paintings out with usually black gesso. I'll lay the canvas on the floor, and I'm throwing gesso down and making marks, and I use paper lifts and repeats and kind of not printing per se, but I'm scraping with tools, and it's very interactive and it's very physical. The painting over here is probably a really good example of that. That was a commission that we did for the gallery. But this painting shows a lot of black that comes through, and that's the black gesso. So when I did this painting, I did it, it wasn't stretched, it was just on rolled canvas. But there were all kinds of marks, and it was a complete black and white set of abstract marks that were on the canvas, and they were on the floor. And then when I lifted it up, with the help of my husband, because it was too heavy for me, but I started to see things in it, and then I started to paint into it. Not that I saw what it ended up being at the time, but I would just follow some marks, or maybe there was something I didn't like and I would layer, some whites over it, or maybe the shape was bigger and I kind of carved into it. So it's just all a matter of constantly changing the tools that I'm using, the color palette and so on, but there's a lot of energy. So that's kind of more of what my paintings would normally be. And I think it was a struggle for me, honestly, to get these paintings to not go to that extreme, because so this painting, for instance, underneath here, you can kind of see some of the marks that were there. In order for it to be quiet in my mind, again, because I wanted to stay true to my idea, I had to go back in there and cover things up, which I don't have a problem doing because I feel like it will get me to where I want to be. And sometimes there's really beautiful passages, but you have to take that risk and you have to just go for it. So I found that by doing that, there's also a couple paintings like the one in the background, or in the back there, the green, the cool green one. I used a colored gesso as opposed to black. So you can purchase colored gessos, you can make them yourself with pigments and so on. But I thought, oh, that's another way to try to get that sense of calm, and I thought that actually worked really well, for me. But my sensibility is that kind of strong language. So I worked almost all the paintings and in that fashion. And by the time I was all done, what I realized was, the reason I called the show Quiet Abundance was, my work is abundant with energy and shapes and organic forms, and it's just what I do. And no matter what I try to do, it just ends up there. But I was able to do the quiet part and realize that abundance doesn't have to be like overdone, too loud, too crazy. You can have abundance and it can be very soulful and very calming. And so that's kind of how I got the name for the show. But it was really nice to walk in here and get a feel for the work altogether, because I felt like it held to what my goal for the show was. I would love to throw or open it up for questions. I thought maybe I'd give you a little bit of my background, if that helps, maybe stimulate some thoughts about, like, process is always something people are interested in, especially if you are an artist. I get tons of process questions, because the process that I've developed has been something that 12 years ago, I got out of the ad world. I started as a graphic designer, and then I was a creative director with fashion, and then I went into an agency and ended up as a senior vice president, executive creative director, blah, blah, blah. But it was left, right brain stuff, and I really wanted to just be creative. So 12 years ago, I got a studio, quit my job, and then just started to create. So I came up with these processes through experimentation and realized, all my training as my classical training to be a figurative artist, which is what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to paint people and, women and these beautiful organic shapes. I mean, I can paint portraits and all of that, but I just had to completely turn my back on it. And I went from I switched from oil to acrylic. Everything is water-based. It allows me to move really fast. It dries quickly, and you can layer, there's so many water-based materials out there now that I wasn't even familiar with, that I started experimenting with. And then, I would paint on acetate and just all kinds of materials. And so when artists come to me and they go, do you teach classes or, you know, and I said, I really don't, because at least not yet, but just experiment, you know, just let go. Try something completely different, like flip the switch and do the opposite of what you normally do. And I suppose it's kind of a life lesson. Go outside of your comfort zone. And so 12 years ago, I did exactly that. I went with some girlfriends and we just completely started, but I had a goal on what I wanted to do. And I did something kind of abstract, and I looked into it and I thought, oh my God, I see like little birds, and I saw some animals, and I saw foliage, but it was abstract. So I thought, whoa, there's something here. What is this? So I just kept pursuing that. And then those things would continue to come into the painting. And about 4 years into it, I was like, wait a minute, I want to be an abstract painter. This isn't like, why are all these figural elements coming into my work? You know, this isn't what I want. This isn't what I thought I wanted. But I think, you know, all of these are good examples. If you look into them, you're going to probably recognize a shape that isn't really the shape of a bird or a horse or a person, but it reminds you of that, and that may be what you see in it. And so it's taken me probably 2 years ago, I embraced that part of who I am, and I let that back into my work. So I think the work has gotten stronger because of it, because it's really, truly who I am and, you know, what my background is. And now I feel completely free, because I'm like, I do some paintings that have, I mean, realistically, you look at them, you go like, oh, looks like abstract, but then you look into it and you go, oh my God, there's a cow and there's a horse and there's, you know, so there's all of these animals in there. And I don't know where they come from, but I'll just make these marks and I'll look into it and I'll see something there, and then instead of running away from it or covering it up, I'll maybe tweak it slightly. Maybe there's something that looks like an ear and I'll make it look a hair more like an ear. But you'd be surprised at what you can look into and see in abstract marks, if that's what you want. Now, it isn't for everyone, but for me, that's just how I interpret, you know, my abstract language. So, does anyone have any questions? Sure.
Hi, I'm a painter, local. My name is Hannah, and Hannah Salia.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I admire your work so deeply. I think you're a marvelous, marvelous painter and artist. And what you're doing, you've been very eloquent about describing how you approached your work. I certainly experienced it that way, but it's just so splendid. It's somehow, the layering is incredibly fresh, even though I know there's many, many layers here, and I know you're working with a lot of different things on top of other things. Mm-hmm. That liminal space between noticing or perceiving something realistic within the context of the abstraction, right. It's like your work absolutely has found that place, at least for me. It's a fantastic work. I just wanted to tell you, I mean, I made a special effort to get here today just to see the work, and now I get to meet you, and my hat's off to you.
Sweet, yeah. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate, even at the opening, you know, you talk to people, you're in your studio as an artist, you're in your studio like 6-7 days a week, and it's just you and the material and the work, and then you create these paintings and they're surrounding you, and you know, you don't know, is it good, is it bad, like you have no perspective. And then, you know, you invite artists to come over and that you trust, and they'll critique your work, and then you don't listen to all of them, but you do some, and then you change it a little bit, and then you really don't know until you see the work in public or displayed. So it's a really, you know, it's part of what we do to make money from the work, but it's not really, it's part of the process, but it's a very little part of the process. But I think for me, the most enjoyable part in some ways because I get to talk to so many people to see what their interpretation is. But thank you very much. Yes, just a second. She's going to be.
So I'm also a huge fan. Follow you on Instagram. And
Thanks.
yeah.
Oh, you follow me on Instagram?
Yes, I do, and I'm also an artist. I'm curious about the materials you use. Do you use pastel markers and different things? Is it mostly just water-based, like acrylic paint and the gessos and things, or do you go in with different tools like graphite or all those kinds of things?
Just about all of what you said except for pastel. I don't use pastel because it would. I do a permanent fix at the end, a spray fix. If that's just fixative for anybody who's not an artist, that you just purchase and spray over the top of it. It helps preserve, because I do use charcoal, like a vine charcoal. Sometimes I'll go in at the end and do a little drawing, maybe to firm up a line or to, just get something more concrete. But there are so many water-based, like there's water-based inks that are phenomenal. And I don't necessarily use them I might take my acrylic paint. I love golden paint, but fluid paint. But then I might add a little bit of that ink in there. It'll give it more vibrancy or something. They have fluorescence. I mean, golden, I experimented in my last body of work with fluorescence and, got these paintings that are just like, whoa, like almost too loud, but it was like experimenting again. They call them crayons. They're water-based crayons. Some of them look just like a crayon, and some of them are like more like in a marker shape. But when you put those down and you spray bottle, you spray water on it, they'll kind of melt a little bit. They'll actually, if you sprayed it, they'll wash right off. But layering and mixing and it just over and over with the acrylic paint is primarily what it is. And then I do use some gesso to paint with also. So, but I was classically trained, and there's fat over lean. There's all these technical things, that you are supposed to do if you're going. And if you're a contemporary painter, you have that in the back of your head because that's how you were trained. So I don't try to push it too far so that it's disposable. For me, I still want the integrity to be there. So I'm careful about that. But yeah, I go to Home Depot and buy all kinds of fantastic tools to scrape and pull, and I use wires and Actually, I did a lot of plein air. Plein air is painting outdoors in nature, and they have competitions, and I did a lot of those. And I'll come with all these weird tools, and the other painters just have their paintbrush. And they're, and it's hard because you're using acrylic outdoors. It dries really fast. But what's fabulous about it is you get up at sunrise. If you're near a water or whatever, you see things that you don't ever see. And you're alone, so you can interpret it. And it's just like you're in touch with nature, but you're creating your own work. And it's been a huge influence for me. I stopped doing it a couple years ago, but that's another thing that I always say, get outside if you want to paint nature,
Do you ever use resist materials, like resist any kind of thing you take off, tape or any?
No.
None of that.
No?
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Shar. My name is Milin. I'm also an artist. A lot of what you said reverberates to me too. I have a graphic design and illustration background. I lived in Chicago, and I had just recently
come to my studio.
Yeah, I would love to. And I thank you for sharing, that part where you embrace abstraction. I've kind of transitioned to that lately too. after, having so much noise and just stuff, right? And then you just kind of stumble upon just being calm. So I see that a lot in your work, and I really like how this balance you have with kind of diffusing the negative space, just quieting them down, and keeping some parts just a little bit, like acknowledging that loudness in parts of your painting, and the textures, all that visual texture. I mean, you can't, like, you're pretty successful at like acknowledging both of those parts, like keeping the loud parts loud and maybe quieting some parts, or maybe it wanted to be quiet rather than you quieting it down. I guess what I'm curious about is a lot of the points of view, from what I see it on your paintings, tend to look down a lot. Like it's very like, looking down with seeing just a little bit of perspective on it. But you have one painting which is over there, the smallest one, and it appears very, it has a horizon-ish space. And I just wondered like how your brain kind of shifted to that. There's a lot of your other paintings here that are looking down, like very much looking down, it seems like, but that one seems a lot more expansive, and it has a horizon line. That's from what I see it. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. First thing I would say is wonderful interpretation. It's your interpretation. So what I've noticed is that what I see, other people don't see. So what I might suggest is what you see, somebody else might not see. So that's what I find so interesting in abstract, because you don't know what you're looking at. It's not obvious. To me, it's kind of, I went to the Seattle Art Museum yesterday, and so much of realism is you know what you're looking at. You might walk up to it, and maybe the technique, the expression, I mean, it moves you. But with abstract, I wanted something where it's just not, it not tricks me, but it gives me the ability to be unique in the way that I see it and the viewer sees it. And that was the only thing. So that particular piece, I did see it how you saw it. And I kind of pushed the foreground, middle ground, background on that piece, because what that piece reminded me of is I go to Door County, Wisconsin a lot. I go to Michigan. I see that a lot, and it felt very landscape. So sometimes, again, the figural, some will be very figural, literally, like you'll see animals in them. Some of them might have just the shape of a figure that might creep in there or something. That one just happened to be a little more landscape, and at the very end, I put the white kind of, they're marks that reminiscent of drips, but they're not vertical drips. Like I did that on purpose. So there's time at the very end, because I wanted it to be grounded, and it almost felt like it was rooting into the bottom space. So it just depends on what I see. Because the peachy one, I see kind of a foreground, middle ground, background in that too. I see that a little bit more landscape. The one behind that I pointed out by Fen was that one, Donnell said he saw space. I see looking down into a pond. You know, in my statement, I mentioned the fact that these are like the quiet in-between moments. Like when you go hiking, I was just in Montana in the mountains hiking in June. And you know, I mean, everywhere you look, it's like, oh my God, it's like input, like crazy. and I'm like taking photos and just enjoying everything I see, but then it's like I stop and I look at the bark, I look at the rocks, I look at the lichen. When you stop and look, those are kind of the moments that like some of these paintings represent to me. Those are, even though there's a lot of motion in them, it's like you take a deep breath and you see this is what nature is and this is how glorious it is, and that's kind of what I want the paintings to have the feel of. Any other questions or thoughts? Yep.
Well, thank you, Shar, and everybody else for sharing, because it constantly shapes. Whenever I look at abstract art, I appreciate the cognitive flexibility that is allowed. And I think that's been mentioned before. It's like you don't, like you said, with the landscape or something realistic, you know what you're looking at. The words are all there in a sentence, and that is what it is. That is what you're experiencing. But with abstract, first time I looked at this, I'm like, I am an avalanche. You know what I mean? So, oh yeah, definitely. So just saying, to the point of cognitive flexibility that's offered in abstract or surreal, you know, whether you're looking at something realistic, it's like all the words are there in a row. The sentence is what it is. That is the experience that you get, which is great. Sometimes we need that. It is actually refreshing over there where that is acceptable, or, you know, where it's presented, I guess. But when I look at something like this, I might think, as I did, like, oh, I am an avalanche. It becomes more experiential. This one actually has drawn me a lot because there's more yellow than in other ones. And it's like seeing a light at the end of a canyon. It's like, okay, I just went through something and now there's something there. There's also seafoam coming, or, you know, kind of that impression like you were saying. Sometimes there's not necessarily the bird or whatever, but there's kind of an impression of it. It's like the letters are there, the words are there, but then we bring our experiences and we shape it however we are feeling, however we see. But the fact that it allows that kind of connection between so many different experiences, I think, is so fascinating to me with abstract and surreal over anything else, because we don't have to agree that it is what we're looking at. It is what the experience is, and it's all valid. It's so beautiful to me. So yeah, I guess that's just kind of my piece and feedback, because, you know, as a musician, I get it. Being in the studio, you know, as long as you are, I've recorded albums and received zero feedback. So it's like, echo. Okay, it's still a function of my being, I have to. But like actually getting that feedback and like, okay, cool. Whether it's expected or not, must be a good feeling. So that's amazing. I just love to share, and, you know, getting to learn the processes and things. I never would have guessed that you started with black gesso until, you know, I can kind of see a little bit here and there, but it's like totally unbeknownst to me. I had no idea. So like, you know, getting to hear your process and background and everything, it's like, okay, I can see the roots. I can see where it came from. Tried this. It didn't look what like, you know, wanted it to, or didn't feel like it, but you adapted. And yeah, I love it. Like, again, kind of going back to flexibility and things, it's amazing. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your art. I'm honored to be here. I was not expecting to be, but I'm very glad that I am. So
Well,
thanks.
thank you for being here. Yeah,
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's so fascinating to hear everyone's interpretation, but it kind of all comes back to the same thing, I think. You know, it's like you're here because whatever artwork you're looking at, but it draws you in. And so that's what's important. So the people who purchase my work, you know, they commission me, it's because they relate to something. It brings something out in them. They like being near it. It does something positive. And, you know, that's, people say, well, they're like your babies or something, you know, like, how do you part with them? And it's just kind of, all of you who are artists know, like, when you're done, because you're moving on to the next thing, and that's what's exciting about, you know, the arts. So thank you all for sharing and being here, and I hope you know a little bit more about my work, and, you know, maybe you'll all try some experimentation and know that, you know, sometimes you land on something and it takes you somewhere really good.